thanks very much for joining us here on TalkTV.
Morning, Jake. Lovely to see you.
2 weeks in a row, Tim. We love having you on. Right, let me ask you. You have made some slightly punchy comments, I think, on Times Radio, which were reported in today's Mail. I want to get straight into those, if we may. You said, apparently, I quote, or you'll know because you said it, the Prime Minister is openly saying to advisers in Downing Street, am I not very good at this? Why isn't anything happening? What did you mean by that, Tim?
Well, a little while ago, Jake, and I think we discussed it briefly on the programme last week, I reluctantly came to the conclusion that Rishi Sunak wasn't a particularly effective politician. A very nice, very decent man, but just wasn't connecting with the voters. And Jake, I don't think anyone after the Liz Truss debacle could necessarily take the Conservative Party to a general election victory, but I think we could minimise the loss. And someone who knows the Prime Minister incredibly well did tell me that he was asking himself the same questions I was publicly asking. He was saying to himself, as you just quoted, why, despite everything I've done, the relaunches, the improvements that have been made, you've just been discussing about the economy, why is the poll rating, rather than going up, still going down? And I would be, he's a human being. Who wouldn't ask those sorts of questions after, when you're sort of the opinion poll ratings of the Tories, some polls are now saying just 18%, historic lows. And so he is questioning his performance, as I think any normal human being would, given the circumstances.
And what do you think? So I guess if you're Rishi Sunak and you're having a shave in the morning, you're having a look at the mirror, there will be an element of, am I the right person to do this? Am I wrong? But he'll also be saying, what about my Tory MPs who are not backing me, and commentators like Tim Montgomerie saying that I'm not up for the job? And he said today in an exclusive podcast with William Hague, available on The Times, that he has had the biggest hospital pass, I don't think it's quite in history, I think it's in decades. Let's play a quick clip of that so you can see it, just in case you've not seen it, Tim. Right, we're going back to it.
To be leader of the party.
I think someone described it as the worst hospital pass for any incoming Prime Minister in however many decades. And clearly it's been there's lots of frustrations. We've been through a lot as a country over the past few years, which people are understandably frustrated about. It makes the environment trickier. But I'm entirely confident that there are better times ahead. And in spite of the challenges that the country's been through, whether that's COVID, the pandemic, the impact of that on everyone, and just as we're recovering from that, to get hit by a war in Ukraine and the impact on energy bills, that's a tough few years for the country. But actually, I'm sure we'll get onto it, but I feel that this year things are turning a corner.
Well, there we go, Tim. You've heard it from him. Do you think it's the biggest hospital pass that anyone's inherited for a few decades?
I'm not sure. Margaret Thatcher, at the end of the 1970s, when the unions were basically wrecking Britain, would necessarily agree with that.
Well, Tim, let me say, Tim, I'm not quite as old as you are, but we've both been knocking around Conservative politics for a while. The question I want to put to you is, and I think this is really interesting for our viewers and listeners at home, is Boris Johnson, you were just getting onto him, 2019, no majority, whereas Rishi Sunak inherited a majority of, figures vary, it keeps going down, but it's 50-odd still. No majority. Parliament absolutely deadlocked. Probably the Conservative Party more divided than it is now, with MPs, well-known MPs like Ken Clarke, who'd been Chancellor of the Exchequer, or, Lord Soames, Nicholas Soames, as he was then at the time, he was an MP, kicked out of the party, albeit by Boris. I think that was a bigger hospital pass, but Boris still went on and won. Now, what do you think? And I'll bring in the quote by John Curtis saying that there is a 99% chance of the Labour Party forming the next government. He didn't say necessarily winning a majority, forming against it. What do we need to do for those of us who still believe in the 1%?
Very good question. Well, look. We know that Rishi Sunak wants to control inflation, and that is something I agree with him on. I think there are better times ahead. They're not going to be soar-away times like they were ahead of the 97 election, but they're going to be better times. But Jake, the question I would ask Rishi, I'd ask you, I'd ask the listeners is, I follow politics incredibly closely, but I don't really know if the Conservatives were to hit that 1% and win another election, what we do with it, or what Rishi Sunak wants to do with it. Does he really want to build houses? Does he want to rebalance the education system so that more people can get apprenticeships rather than necessarily prioritising university? What is it? I don't know. And
Tim, you're asking, don't ask me because I'm asking the questions. You know, you have to get up earlier in the morning to trick me, Tim Montgomerie. I've known you far too long to fall into one of your well-known traps. However, you do ask the listeners. So Richard in Truro literally texted in while we've been talking saying, hospital pass, should be an exclamation mark. Sunak asked for that pass. Does he expect us to really feel sorry for him? And that is part of the problem, isn't it? Is that, you know, he wanted to be leader of the Conservative Party, had a slightly circuitous route to it, which I don't think we need to go into. I've still got the scars on my own back from it. He asked for it, but then you're saying, Tim, from the sound of it, that he got there and he didn't really know what he wanted to do when he got there. Is that what you're saying?
I'm exactly saying that. I now appoint you as my spokesman, Jerry, because you're doing a better job of explaining what I think.
Yeah, exactly. And all you've got to do is get my name right, because it's Jake, not Jerry. But don't worry about it.
I didn't say Jake. Did I say Jerry?
You did say Jerry, yeah. Well, let me ask you. Come on, we've got to move on.
I haven't even had a pint yet at lunchtime, and I'm already getting
behave yourself. I'm losing control, as I always do. Let me also ask you this then. So one of the big things that where Rishi Sunak is pinning that 1% hope on, not my number, Richard Curtis's number, John Curtis, I beg your pardon, you've got me going now on it as well, is the boats for votes. So I think the basic, how I think it works is we stop the votes, we get more boats. Figures today show record high number of crossings. Do you think his boats for votes or stop the boats for votes strategy is working?
Well, it isn't. And I think even if we manage to get flights taking off to Rwanda, I can easily sort of see, Jake, the social media, juxtaposition where you have, 20, 30 people on a plane going to Rwanda and a picture of a boat, or boats, hundreds coming in. And I think that's the problem. We pin too much on the Rwanda policy. I don't think the Rwanda government will allow it to be as big as perhaps the Prime Minister we would all want. I think the best thing that Rishi Sunak can do to ensure that that 1% happens or is a bit larger is talk about the economic story, which is better, but also start asking some questions about Labour. If the next general election is just a referendum on the Tories, there is, as John Curtis said, there is a 99% chance that Labour will win that. But start making it a choice. Ask some tough questions about what Labour are exactly going to do, because they're making all sorts of promises about rescuing the NHS, etc. Making all sorts of promises about rescuing the NHS, but they've got no plan, no economic agenda to actually afford better investment in public services. And turn the election into a choice, not a referendum.
Well, okay. Well, on that choice, Tim, we see Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner, actually in the West Midlands at the moment, literally now launching their election campaign, wrapping themselves up in the sort of the flag of levelling up, saying that Boris Johnson's plan for levelling up was right, even though they clearly, because they're the opposition, disagree with the implementation. The last fortnight we've heard Rachel Reeves praising Margaret Thatcher. Is there really now any choice between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party at the election? Because as far as I can tell, the new Labour strategy is pretend to be Conservative.
Yeah, but we know, Jay, you better than I, because you sit opposite them in the House of Commons. Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer may say that they are a different party, completely different party from the one that Jeremy Corbyn led a few years ago. But we know that a lot of those MPs who sit behind him, a lot of things that both of them, Rachel and Keir Starmer, did, they have a lot of left-wing policies they've supported over recent years. And I think the British people need to ask themselves, what is the real Labour Party? Is it the party that they're presenting to us up front, or is it how they've been voting for years? Like Keir Starmer saying control of immigration is fundamentally racist. You wouldn't get a Conservative, you wouldn't say that, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
Despite the spin, Labour and the Tories are still very different.
Tim, I completely agree with you. I mean, on that, we've got the Prime Minister, you push that 1%, he's got to remind everyone that Keir Starmer is the leader, but it's still Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. Tim, thank you so much for joining us. We love having you on.